In the grungy, rain-soaked Seattle of the early 90s, while most bands were singing about pain and darkness, three guys instead decided to write songs about peaches, cats, and bugs. The presidents of the United States of America burst onto the scene with modified guitars, infectious hooks, and a mission to bring laughter back to rock and roll. Their story is one of unexpected success, creative burnout, and multiple comebacks. Given that it's the US presidential election tomorrow, I figured this was probably the most appropriate story to do. The origins of the band begin with vocalist and bassist Chris Ballew and guitarist Dave Dederer, who met in a preppy junior high school called Bush. But they didn't form a band immediately. In fact, it wasn't until they both went off to college and returned to Seattle that they played music together. Dederer, according to the Associated Press, was a school teacher and jammed at a Bush alumni event with Ballew, and that finally kickstarted the idea of them forming a band. Ballew had previously played in a punk busker band named Egg. Some of the songs Egg wrote eventually morphed into the President's songs, most notably Naked and Famous, a commentary on the vapidness of Los Angeles. Fun fact you guys may not know is that Chris Ballew even lived with musician Beck in the early 90s in Los Angeles, and even performed with him during live shows as a multi-instrumentalist. Playing with Beck informed Chris's beliefs about how to interact with audiences, telling Spin, "I dislike the tone of the band. I like to reach out and take care of the audience," and Beck was not interested in taking care of the audience at that point, so that didn't work for me. Chris and Dave originally started out as a musical duo. Lacking a drummer, they played several shows in late 1993 under several monikers, including the Lo-Fi's, the Dynamic Duo, and Pure Frosting, before landing on the name they're best known for, the Presidents of the United States of America. The name came from a house party that the band was playing. They were introducing themselves between each song using different monikers, and the Presidents garnered the best response as the room broke out into laughter. While we're on the topic of laughter, the band was all about bringing humor back to rock music. Dave told the New York Daily News, "Chuck Berry's lyrics are hilarious. Little Richard was a scream. All of a sudden with 60s and 70s art rock, it became a rule that you can't be funny anymore. But great rock and roll is always funny." Chris admitted to the LA Daily News that his lyrics he wrote were purposely simple, and at the same time, he wanted to create a lot of imagery. His mission was to basically write bouncy, rhythmic, and fun songs. By December of '93, Chris and Dave expanded to a three-piece, adding drummer Jason Finn. Finn was playing in another Seattle band called Love Battery, and he spent nearly half a year lobbying the duo to become a president. Love Battery at the time was already signed to Atlas Records, so initially Finn was splitting his time between both bands before he finally left Love Battery. I also want to point out that Finn played in two other famous Seattle bands, the Fastbacks and Skinyard. It was by early '94 the trio recorded a 10-song cassette named Froggy Style in just one day. They sold the cassette, of course, at live shows and Finn's place of employment, a bar called The Comet. The trio, though, were an anomaly in the Seattle scene, which was largely made up of bands who sang about their difficult and dark life experiences. The Presidents weren't full of angst. In fact, they injected a ray of sunshine into the fog and rain of the scene, singing short, punchy songs about fruit, toys, bugs, and cats. Chris told Spin, "I don't really have much to say. I've had a really good life. I've had the room and space and freedom to be imaginative. I haven't had anyone close to me die. I haven't had any real hard times, so I feel more productive to dwell on good things." He added to the Edmonton Journal that he always saw animals as personifying human traits and characteristics, hence why he writes so many songs about them. Adding, "Worms are secret people, pigs are like party people, frogs are enthusiastic people, dogs are like curious people, and cats are people with attitude." The band even poked fun at their own chances of success with tracks like "We Are Not Gonna Make It," which was borrowed from a friend's band. Dave added that the grunge thing is, and I quote, "a total anomaly in Seattle," claiming the city was closer to groups like Louie Louie than I Hate Myself and I Want to Die. As for where their inspiration came from, they pointed the finger at Steve Miller, claiming that his songs were goofy like theirs, and they wanted to be known as the Steve Miller Band of the '90s. I'm a picker.
I'm a grinner, I'm a lover, and I'm a sinner.
There was even one interview the trio gave where they said they wanted their second record to be produced by Steve Miller, and they were going to call it Produced by Steve Miller. The trio's music was also heavily influenced by the likes of Boston, Nazareth, Cheap Trick, the Beatles, and ELO, while also seeing influences from local Seattle bands like the Sonics, the Fabulous Wailers, and the Kingsmen. A lot of the press coverage referred to the band's style of music as power pop or pop punk with elements of funk. Dave admitted to the Albuquerque Journal, "Our whole reputation in Seattle was based on our live shows. We got no press or advertising in the first year we played, but we packed the clubs. People perceived us as being a good rock band that put on a good show." He went on to add that their audiences in their early days were mostly made up of people in their late 20s. The President's music was also notable because Chris and Dave played bass guitar and git bass, which are regular guitars with special modifications. For Chris's instrument, he had 2 bass strings, while Dave's instrument had 3 guitar strings. Chris admitted in several interviews that he got the idea from an unlikely place. Mark Sandman of the band Morphine, who he played with in a band called Supergroup and shared an apartment with in Boston. This was before the Presidents formed. Chris remarked, "It was an improvisational band. It started out as a joke doing bad songs in a bar in Boston to a full-time thing." Chris admitted in the same interview that he went through a several-year writing drought, and playing the 2-string bass opened up his mind to songwriting. He told the LA Daily News, "It boils down to the bare minimum. If a song can't exist on 1 string with a vocal melody, then it's not worth remembering." With Finn telling the Toronto Star, "With 2 and 3 string guitars, you've basically peeled off the high ends of both. That gives you a dense, overlapping, stormy mid-range over which the singer can actually be heard." While label Sub Pop has long been synonymous with Seattle in the 80s and 90s, there was another label that had been around for longer, Pop Llama, which released the trio's self-titled album in 1995. The Presidents eventually nabbed a deal with Columbia Records. Things finally started to take off for the group when they performed for an American Society of Composers, Authors, and Publishers showcase in early 1994 in Seattle. A few months later, the band played South by Southwest to a packed house, and despite being courted by major labels, the trio lacked the confidence to think that they could sign with a major recording company and be successful. Chris told the Daily Press, "We were like this little ska band. We practiced in all other bands' practice spaces. We had board equipment, and we didn't know if we had what it took to make more than 1 record." He was even skeptical that his jokey tunes about animals could find an audience in angst-loving rock fans. Columbia ended up reissuing their debut record in late 95. The album's packaging contained a picture of the trio with President Bill Clinton, but it's not a doctored image. The band played a Clinton rally in 1994. Dave told the LA Times, "He shook our hands, we gave him a t-shirt, the whole thing took 10 seconds. I'm not sure if he even heard us play, so we sent him some CDs, 1 for him, 1 for Chelsea," referring to his daughter. The group's debut record was a massive success, peaking at number 6 on the Billboard album chart, and their debut album also went triple platinum in America, quadruple platinum in Canada and Australia, and gold in the UK. The single Kitty peaked at number 13 on the alternative airplay chart and 67 on the radio songs chart. The album had 2 huge singles in Lump, which topped the alternative airplay chart and peaked at number 7 on the mainstream rock tracks chart.
She's not, she might be dead.
The song was written about a dim-witted girl. The video was directed by Roman Coppola, the son of Francis Ford Coppola, who did the Godfather movies. They also had another big single with Peaches, which peaked at number 24 on the mainstream rock tracks chart and number 8 on the alternative airplay chart.
Peaches come from a can. They were put there by a man.
The song's meaning has been the subject of much discussion online, coupled with the song Kitty, with some speculating that both songs are about sex. But Chris remarked to Songfacts, the key line moving to the country going to eat a lot of peaches, "I overheard a homeless man who was walking by the bus stop where I was waiting for a bus. He was saying it under his breath over and over again. I've never heard a homeless guy talk about his future and peaches in the country like that. All I had was that, and I was trying to be Nirvana in the verse, gnarly and growly."
And if I had my little way, I'd eat peaches every day.
There was a separate interview where he claimed that the verses were about hallucinogenic drugs and he went to a girl's house he had a crush on to tell her how he felt, but she wasn't home. So he sat in her yard, which was under a peach tree. He was having a psychedelic experience, smashing peaches in his fist, adding, "She never showed up, so I never got to tell her, but I bottled it and turned it into that song." The woman he liked was named Mary Lou Lord, who was said to have dated Kurt Cobain before he met and eventually married Courtney Love, well before Nirvana blew up. The President's success took the members by surprise, with Finn telling the interviewer, "We didn't even think kids would buy our record. We figured kids would think, there's no way I'm going to get laid if I own this record. But then MTV started playing us all the time, so I guess it made us cool." The band was even asked to play Saturday Night Live in 1995, but it coincided with Chris's wedding, so they turned it down. The band in 1996 were nominated for a Grammy along with fellow Seattle band Foo Fighters for Best Alternative Performance, and the trio took home the 1995 Seattle poll for Best Single and Song and Lump and Best New Artist. The band returned in 1996 with their second record titled 2, which came out on the same day as the presidential election. But the group was quick to point out in the press for the album that despite their name and the release day of their album, they had no interest in talking politics or giving their opinion on the presidential candidates. Their second album was a commercial disappointment, going only gold and peaking at number 31 on the US album charts. The album had a few charting singles in Mach 5 as well as Volcano. The trio played their final show together for the time being in January of '98 at the Paramount Theater, with all the proceeds going to charity. The same year, they released an album of rarities, B-sides, and live performances called Pure Frosting. Chris wanted to spend more time at home with his wife, and he recently became a father and also wanted to pursue other musical projects. Finn became a partner in the Asteroid Cafe, an Italian restaurant in Seattle, and played with local musicians, while Dederer did the same, playing with Guns N' Roses bassist Duff McKagan, and he also unsuccessfully auditioned for Weezer in 1998, and of course spent time with his family. Then a few years later in 2000, the Presidents reconvened and announced their return. However, they adopted a new moniker for the time being called the Quitters. There was a fan site that claimed that their old label owned the name the Presidents of the United States of America, and the band had to wrestle control from their old label once they found out there was another band named the Quitters. Although I will point out that I don't recall seeing the members talk about this. Chris looked back at the breakup, recalling, "I could have handled it better." The catalyst of them reuniting was when the trio in 1999 teamed up with Seattle rapper Sir Mix-a-Lot on a project called Subset. It proved to be satisfying creatively and a local success, as they played the grand opening of the Experience Music Project, a place where Dederer volunteered his time. The trio were also approached by local label Music Blitz to record new material. The timing seemed perfect, as Chris had a ton of songs lying around that were collecting dust. The band spent 10 days on their comeback album titled Freaked Out and Small that incorporated a Hammond organ and piano. The band still, however, had their comedic edge, goofing on pretentious musicians with songs like Jazz Guy and paying homage to Star Wars with tunes like Death Star, while more serious tunes like Heading Out chronicle the band's first run in the 90s.
It's the Death Star, something so incredible.
The album was also notable because all the songs were played with normal guitars and bass in standard tuning, but the band was adamant that they weren't going to be doing an extensive reunion tour, as that had previously contributed to their burnout, and they only played a few shows to support the record. Due to being on a smaller label and a lack of touring, the album didn't chart and sold around 25,000 copies. The Presidents played a New Year's Eve show in 2002, and that set in motion more regular tours and shows as things finally felt right to hit the road again. But they didn't tour as extensively as they did in the past, as they were now family men. The band returned in 2004 with their follow-up record in time for the election, called Love Everybody, on their own label. They did have one charting single in Some Postman that peaked at number 31 on the Modern Rock Tracks chart.
Postman is grooving to all our love letters. Some postman is gonna cry.
The album was the last to feature Dave Dederer, and he would be replaced by fellow Seattle musician Andrew McKaig. Dederer remained involved with the group behind the scenes, managing some of the recordings and publishing work, and in his own words from a 2023 Reddit AMA, He stated they never felt on the sidelines despite not actively performing with the band for many years. The frustration, though, of running their own label and dealing with the business side of things led to the band releasing their 2008 follow-up on EMI-owned Fugitive Recordings. Funny enough, just in time for the 2008 presidential election. The video for the single Mixed Up SOB was directed by longtime friend and fan Weird Al, who funny enough spoofed Lump years prior with his own take called Gump.
He's gump, he's gump, he's gump, cause he ain't bread. She's a mixed up son of a bitch. Yeah.
It seemed like since 1996 it was customary for the band to return every presidential election year with a new album. And then in October of 2008, Lump was released on the video game Rock Band 2, while the tracks Ladybug, Feather Pluckin', and Dune Buggy were issued as downloadable content for the game on November 4th, 2008, coinciding with the year's presidential election. I personally paid for and own the pack. Following Dave Dederer's exit from the group, he went on to work on the corporate side of Amazon in several significant roles over multiple years, including the head of programming and editorial at Amazon Music, business development principal, in addition to the head of content licensing. In November of 2013, the band started a Pledge Music project in order to release a new studio album, which was 2014's Kudos to You, that met its goal in 1 week. The band also released their first full live album, Thanks for the Feedback, the same year. Then on November 16, 2016, Chris stated that the band had dissolved sometime in the summer of 2015 as they finally wanted to move on, calling themselves, and I quote, old people now. In the years since, Chris has begun recording and performing as children's artist Casper Babypants and has released several albums under that moniker.
And he will shake this town if he ever comes this way again.
In 2020, the band used Kickstarter to reissue their debut album in time for its 25th anniversary of its original release, and then in December of 2022, the band announced a limited edition vinyl reissue of their demo tape Froggy Style. That does it for today's video, guys. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again in Rock Roll True Stories. Take care.